So, good morning.
Hi there.
So glad to meet with you today. So we're gonna dive into your O3, and we'll first circle back to last week's action step of making sure that you had a clear model for
Okay.
students during the before reading portion of the lesson, before they went into the during reading portion, and were expected to do the work themselves. And do what you have modeled.
Okay.
So I wanted to just talk about some specific successes around your last lesson that I observed. So there were many. So one of the successes I saw that we had talked about was stating a clear objective or thinking job during your lesson. So this past lesson was focused on the bottom line of identifying theme, and you gave like a clear thinking job of what they would need to think of while they were reading to think of the definition of a theme. You named that they need to be thinking about the internal conflict, how a character changed during what they read, what the character learned, and what can we learn as a reader to help students identify the theme. I thought those were like the right key points to stress and the right things for them to think about, and they were also connected to your think aloud during the model. Also, we talked about just having instructional signage that has the thinking job steps on it so that students can refer back to it. And you had that done in a very clear way. There were only 3 to 4 steps in the model. You had it charted before they started reading. And you also told scholars that you would guide them through the step-by-step modeling and think aloud, and you told them that they would be responsible for identifying the theme at the end of your model, like based on the things that you thought aloud. So I felt like you did a really good job of just stating that expectation, and you also charted your thinking as you modeled in a very clear way, which is another thing we talked about last week. So what do you feel was the potential impact on scholar learning and their ability to identify the theme?
So the week before in whole group reading, we had a lesson on theme, and I felt like they didn't fully understand it, so I saw guided reading as an opportunity to reteach the skill from whole group as well. So I used the same strategy steps that we used in that whole group reading lesson, and like because I clearly said these are the steps I'm looking for, you're going to be accountable for this after we finish reading, I felt like they really understood theme a lot better than the week before.
Yeah, and I noticed that in the video, like they were able to actually, when you probe them around like what an internal conflict was, what it means to like notice character change, they were able to make those connections and verbalize to you what they were, which is great because you made a connection from their previous learning to what they're learning right now. And that's one thing that we've just wanted to work on as a school, is making sure that their whole group reading lessons are relevant to what they're doing in reading, comp, and guided reading, because those two things should connect. So great job of making that connection and actually thinking ahead of that, thinking ahead on that. And I also saw that while you were modeling, they were able to see how you use text evidence to answer questions during the think aloud, and that would enable them to identify the theme later, and they would be able to use the text too as they were thinking about how to identify themes. So thanks for like working hard to think about what they did not get during previous lessons, and looking at the data from that and bringing that into a guided reading group, or a reading comprehension group rather, to make sure students were successful. So just to move forward and think about more about diving into the rigor of your lessons, and I know that group that you were teaching was that was Ambianzi, or was that Excellence?
Excellent.
It was Excellence. So that is a group that definitely is like fully capable of like reaching grade level standards, and we want to make sure that we're pushing their thinking and increasing the rigor in your groups and shifting the heavy lifting and thinking load to scholars like more and more as we launch into Unit 3. Because Unit 3 is pretty much like the halfway point of the year, and we want to make sure that while we're providing clear think alouds and clear models, we're also leveraging the success of models to help students be able to think and do more of the heavy lifting on their own. So as you think back to the video lesson
Mhm.
and the fact that you wanted students to identify the theme by the end of your Think Aloud, what would it have looked like for students to have done most of the cognitive lift and be able to accurately answer the rigorous question of what is the theme of the story?
I think I could have used more of like the Socratic method with my questions during the guided practice. I think I was like more focused on time than I maybe should have been and was doing part of the lifting for them. But if I would have just like asked a question, waited for their response, and then come up with another question based off their answer to get them closer to it, but let them find it themselves.
So maybe like more strategic probing. You
Yeah.
think? What else do you feel like you could have possibly done?
I could have found a point in the story to stop and do like more guided practice.
So doing more guided practice. So like if you think back to the lesson, what did you ask them to do? Like right when you jumped into the theme, what do you think you asked them to do?
I think I just like went right through the steps that I had, and I think I helped them a lot get to the final answer for each of the steps.
So you thought through all the steps, and which is supposed to help guide their thinking to the final answer. But I think what you just said was key. Like when you asked them to identify a theme, you just kind of asked, and you just said like provided a little more wait time and provided more probes, which I think are keys to success for like helping scholars answer those questions more on their own. Also, I just sent you a criteria for success for like scholars doing the heavy lifting. So if you look at both the teacher actions and student actions, what do you think are some things that you could have also done in addition to probing?
Can I read these out loud?
Or you can read them to yourself or read them out loud if you prefer.
Plan exemplar responses for rigorous questions. Script expectations for writing. What will students be held accountable for? What resources should they rely on to write responses? I would like to have done some kind of writing. I think like as we get into Unit 3, I would like to make time for writing every single time we meet in the excellence and ambiance. Script opportunities for students to spar with one another and discuss whole group. Aggressively monitor during student discussion and writing. And then student actions, write for whatever the allotted time period is with understanding. Be able to express verbally their responses and what they learned from others. So like sharing with the whole group after. I like that. Be able to add to and build upon one another's thinking and revise their responses. Yeah, this is all like very much higher level thinking. Go back into the text to support answers with relevant details. Yeah, it's good.
So, you thought of like some really good things that I even didn't put on and we can add that to like the criteria for success around the probes and around, I think you said probes, and what else did you say you could have done? Giving them more probes.
Wait time.
And wait
just
time.
Silence, yeah.
Yeah, and I think like if you add in the writing piece, like that gives you the opportunity to probe students because you can actually, like when we talk about aggressively monitoring, that's when you can add a probe. If you see like a student that needs some guidance, you can probe and you can do so more effectively. And also just making sure you add the wait time, like giving the writing gives them the time and space that they need. In order to be able to answer the question. So the things you thought about and incorporating them into having scholars do more writing and talking around what they write and having a full discussion are things that will all help them help add to the rigor of the lesson and enable students to do the heavy lifting. Again, like we touched a little bit on what the gap could have potentially been. But I do want to look at a portion of your lesson.
Okay.
And like 13% in like 5 minutes.
That's good.
Had nothing. So if we look at your lesson and thinking about this criteria for success, the fact that you talked about probing, and the fact that we like talked about how writing could be effective. If you look at the video of you from, if you look at the video from your lesson, what do you feel like are some things that could have potentially been added?
Okay.
What opportunities were there for you to have to just do some of these things?
Okay. Do you ever think it's a good idea for the kids to be the charterer?
I think like eventually they could be. I think right now, since you're just starting it and you're modeling the think aloud, I think right now you charting is probably best. The other thing that can happen is we can do like board equals paper, so they can have a graphic organizer.
I think that's good.
And like once you have once you've thought of something that you want them to write down, they can write it down, and I think that's a good idea too, because they can add that. They can have a graphic organizer, so when they have to answer questions on their own, they have like something right.
That's true. That's really true.
To refer to. So,
okay.
Yeah. I know it's always like you have to watch yourself.
Oh goodness.
Okay, don't act like you're better than anybody else.
Back it up a little bit more.
He needed his friends to help him. He needed to be stronger. He needed to come up with a plan. And he ended up getting hurt very, very badly, right? Prince learns, don't get cocky. You are fast and focused, and you are not. Okay, so that's what Prince learned. And what can we learn? Amari.
There's some conversations.
It's Brent.
Okay, don't act like you're better than anybody else.
They were really good at finding the application, which I was happy about.
I mean, they did identify the.
I would like to hear your other.
She identified the correct thing,
Yeah.
and I think they were confident in trying.
It honestly was kind of a tricky story, so they did well. It's my girls.
The little girls group. So if you were just watching that video, where were some opportunities for them to have done like some of the things that were on the CFS?
Yeah. I really like the idea of doing the board equals paper for when I was charting, just so that they can really be thinking, not daydreaming during that time. And then, it would have been great to have them. So, like, when I asked maybe the third or the fourth question, I would have said, okay, we're looking for this. In 2 minutes, we're going to come back together after you've written your response. They write their responses. I'm like aggressively monitoring as they're doing it. We come back together. I have to share their response, and then together we come up with a response.
Yeah, so I think that was perfect. Like after number 3 is, I think the question you asked was what lesson
Did the
character learn, and then you asked what lesson did you learn. So both of those were like great opportunities for you to have them write, aggressively monitor, and then like discuss as a whole group, because that was like the most rigorous part of that lesson.
Okay.
And made them like work towards identifying the overall thing. So I think that was like correctly identified. So thinking of everything we just talked about what would be